Greetings. Father Mark signing on, continuing the course on the history of Catholicism in the United States. Continuing with the last video, we started the 1840s, so this is now the second video, continuing that decade. The year 1840 was an election year in which President number 9 was elected, William Henry Harrison, with his vice president, who later became president number 10, John Tyler. William Henry Harrison was born in 1773 in Charles City County, Virginia. His father died when he was young, enlisted in the Army to escape poverty, served with distinction in numerous frontier battles against indigenous peoples. He won the decisive Battle of Tippecanoe, which is in what is now Indiana, on November 6, 1811. The battle occurred at a strategic river junction, the rivers, the Wabash and the Tippecanoe rivers. Recall in the 1830s videos, we covered the collapse of the Federalist Party because of the widespread public perception, probably true, that John Quincy Adams had stolen the election from Andrew Jackson with the connivance of the then Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, whom Quincy Adams then appointed his own Secretary of State. So because of that, Quincy Adams only served one term. The Federalists never recovered. They collapsed as a party. Yet they were the Federalists, the interest, those who believed in a strong central government, federal government, they still existed. They just, they didn't stop existing. But the Federalist Federalist name or label, as we'd say today, was so tainted that they became the Whigs. Identifying now that the England has the Whigs and the Tories. The Tories would generally consider the monarchist and the landed interest, aristocratic interest, whereas the Whigs were the commercial interest, the business, pro-business interest. So they were not connected. The American Whigs and the British Whigs were not connected in the sense that they were not managed centrally. Like there was not one Whig party that had an English branch and an American branch. However, they did share many commonalities, which is why the American Whigs, adopted that they were pro-commerce, they were pro-business. Now, the difference with the British system, is that the monarchy, there was different stands about that, whereas that was not an issue for American Whigs. So the American Whigs did believe in a stronger central government than did the British Whigs, because in the 1840s the central government was still dominated by aristocrats and the monarchy was much stronger. So don't take that. But anyway, the American Whigs were pro-business, the Chamber of Commerce types, and strong central government, as they believed that served the economy. So they were pro-national bank. They were they were in favor of the federal government. Promoting trade actively, infrastructure, roads, bridges, ports, etc. Jackson, partially because he was perceived to have had his first run as president stolen from him, he not only won, he not only beat Quincy Adams the next time, but also won a second, so he served 2 terms. But then that's it. Even though the Constitution did not limit the president to 2 terms at this point in history, President Washington only served 2 terms, and so that was followed. That example was followed by everyone until FDR. With Jackson's 2 terms finished, he did not go away. He still was the dominating force in the Democratic Party, but still without being president, that does change things. So the Whigs perceived an opportunity in that, as well as in an economic collapse, one of the periodic economic depressions in American history. In this case, it was blamed on Jackson's policies specifically his destruction of the National Bank, which everybody, he opposed the bank. Everybody knew that when they elected him. He ran against that idea because he was more of a states' rights guy, and he did not like the federal government having that much power. Now, whether the economic collapse was connected causally or only coincidentally to Jackson's suppression of the bank, that's a subject for debate. But the Whigs perceived it as an opportunity, knowing that the party, the Democrats, were in power, so they were going to get blamed for it, and the Whigs could capitalize on that. And since Jackson had been a war hero, the Whigs ran another war hero, Harrison, so they ran on the slogan of Tippecanoe and Tyler too. So Harrison being the victor at the Battle of Tippecanoe, and John Tyler being his vice president. So the Whigs won the 1840 presidential election. Harrison, however, contracted pneumonia during his inauguration ceremony, which at this period in American history, the inaugurations took place later. They took place, this one was on March 4th, 1841, instead of January. It got moved up later in history. And he died. He died a month later. Harrison was the first president to die in office. Not assassinated. Just to die in office. And he's still the shortest serving president in U.S. history. His grandson, Benjamin Harrison, became the 23rd president in 1889. Meanwhile, with his death, Harrison's death, on April 4th, 1841, he was automatically followed by his vice president, John Tyler, who became president number 10, and served without a vice president for the rest of his term. He was born in 1790 in the same area as Harrison. He was born in Charles City County, Virginia. Entered local politics, won election to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1816, joined the nascent Whig Party movement, which followed the Federalist, because he detested Andrew Jackson, but it was personal. He did agree. Ironically, he did agree with many of Jackson's ideas about the way the country should be run, but he couldn't be in the same party as Jackson because Jackson, ran the party, and they just hated him. Thought he was a preening, unstable, bombastic, irresponsible egotist. Elected vice president to William Henry Harrison, Tyler has the distinction of being the first vice president to replace a deceased president in office. The Whigs, in keeping with their, we'd say platform today, but say then just their philosophy, their governing philosophy, the Whigs wanted the national bank back to create a national banking system and also to fund infrastructure development. But Tyler, as president, surprised them. He opposed successfully. He successfully opposed a rechartering of the national bank, which the Whigs regarded as a betrayal. So they did not nominate him to run in the next election. But as a lame duck president, he still managed to secure a joint resolution of Congress to annex Texas in March of 1845, and that led to the Mexican-American War, which we will cover in due course. But 1841 is when he became president. Same year, on April 11th, 1841, only 7 days after the death of President Harrison, we find occasion to become reacquainted with a French-born Vincentian missionary, priest, later Archbishop, Jean-Marie Odin, O-D-I-N. Odin was, I say, just so you have it, he lived from 1800 to 1870. He served as the first bishop of Galveston, Texas, from 1847 to 1861. and then served as second Archbishop of New Orleans from 1861 to 1870 when he died. He was the seventh of 10 children born in Hauteville, France. It's in the around the Loire, in the Loire department of France. His uncle was a priest. Odin attended the Sulpician Seminary in Lyon, where in 1822 he accepted an invitation for vocations, for missionary work, from Bishop Louis de Bourgh, who was the second Bishop of New Orleans, whom we've already met. And this was actually when we met Odin. He was one of those that accepted. So came back to the United States with de Bourgh. And remember, Bishop, because of the trustee problem, Bishop de Bourgh, even though he was Bishop in New Orleans, he abandoned New Orleans, and he actually based himself in St. Louis, Missouri, which at the time was part of the Diocese of Louisiana and the two Floridas. So Odin completed major seminary at St. Mary of the Barons in Perryville, Missouri, on the outskirts of St. Louis. He entered the congregation of the mission, conventionally referred to as the Vincentians or the Lazarists. He professed on November 8th, 1822, was ordained a priest by Bishop de Bourgh on May 4th, 1823. Initially assigned to missionary work in Missouri and Arkansas, he served as professor and president of St. Mary's Seminary, his alma mater. He accompanied Bishop Joseph Rosati, who was the founding bishop of St. Louis, Missouri, when it was cut off in 1826. The northern part of the Louisiana Territory was hived off to create the Diocese of St. Louis, Missouri, and Rosati was the founding bishop. 7 years later, Odin accompanied Rosati as peritus for the bishop to the Second Provincial Council of Baltimore in 1833. We met him again in October of 1839 when he was appointed vice prefect of ecclesiastical affairs in the Republic of Texas, which we also covered in the 1830s and 1835. Texas, which had been part of Mexico, seceded and won a war against Mexico to achieve their independence. In the course of his duties, he made a tour of the area, along with a fellow Vincentian, ethnically a Spaniard, named Udald Estany. Together they traveled to meet another Vincentian who had been in Texas for a year, another Spanish Vincentian, Miguel Calvo. Odin wrote a report of this first reconnaissance to the Superior General of the Vincentians, Jean-Baptiste Etienne. The report was posted from Galveston on April 11th, 1841, and reads in part, quote, "Last year, the Holy See having conferred on our congregation the spiritual direction of the Catholics in Texas, I left the Seminary of the Barons on May 2nd, 1840, in order to explore this new mission in my capacity as Vice Prefect Apostolic. It was not without regret that I left Missouri, to separate myself from a people who had become very dear to me, and from a flourishing establishment that I had seen born, was like expatriating myself a second time." And skipping down. Although the exact figures of the population of Texas are not known, it is rather generally agreed not to exceed 30,000 souls. When the Spaniards settled in Texas more than a century and a half ago, some Franciscans came and founded several missions in order to convert and civilize this is the term he uses, to civilize the savage tribes. Again, I'm sorry, that's the term he uses. They became flourishing and soon counted a great part of fervent neophytes. We took route to San Antonio, one of those missions. The distance which separates the two towns, Victoria to San Antonio, is only 50 leagues. Only. A league is 3 miles, so 50 leagues is 150 miles. But the numerous bands of, again, I'm sorry, he uses the word savage. So, the numerous bands of savage Comanches and Tunacanis who roam the country without ceasing make the trip extremely perilous. It is even pretty nearly certain that one will be massacred if one does not travel in sufficient numbers to intimidate the Indians. We therefore joined a convoy of 22 wagons, which were transporting merchandise. All of our companions were very well armed. The heat was excessive, and scarcely a bush offered itself in the shade of which we might enjoy a moment of repose. All right, then he goes on like that. They make it to San Antonio, and then picking up the quote again. There is nothing more beautiful than the valley of San Antonio. This guy was born in the Loire River Valley in France, so that's saying something. Agreeable climate, pure and healthful air, rich and fertile soil, all contribute to make it a delightful place, without the continual hostilities of the savages, who up to the present have not permitted its immense resources to be exploited. There is not a family who does not mourn the death of a father, of a son, of a brother, or of a spouse pitilessly slaughtered by the Comanches. It goes on like that for a while, then picking up the quote again. After 3 months in San Antonio, we pick up the quote. I went to Austin, a powerful little town, recently designated to be the seat of the Texas government. The Congress was then in session. Now remember, at this period, Texas is a republic, a separate republic. So this is not referring to the U.S. Congress. The Congress was then in session. I solicited from some of the legislators a decision which would confirm to the Catholic Church all the churches constructed by the Spaniards in former times. It is true that with the exception of Concepcion and San Jose, these edifices are almost all in ruins. Nevertheless, they can be repaired, and considering the poverty and small numbers of the faithful, they can be turned to account while awaiting happier times that will give us the chance of constructing new ones. Thanks to the generous intervention of Monsieur Alphonse Dubois de Saligny, Chargé d'Affaires of France, my request has been well received. Heaven has already begun to bless our feeble work. From August 1st, 1840 to March 1st, 1841, we have heard 911 confessions, administered 281 baptisms. There have been 478 communions. Then he goes on like that. All right, so you get the... Okay, so now, recall, Spain, when Spain, moved in, conquered Mexico from the Aztecs, Spain imposed feudalism. And as well, it made it a colony, but imposed feudalism on them. And because Spain was a Catholic monarchy, the church had established status in Spain as well as all of Spain's colonies, which meant that government money, from the treasury was used to fund Catholic missionary work, to build missions, to build schools, build churches. And then Mexico revolted, seceded from Spain, then fought an 11-year-long war against Spain to make it stick, to achieve their independence, declared itself a republic, largely modeled on the United States, but not entirely, because the Republic of Mexico insisted on retaining the same control over the church that the Spanish monarchy had. Well, when Texas seceded from Mexico, those who led the revolt in Texas were largely Anglos from the United States who came, and they were not Catholic. I mean, they were Protestants. So nevertheless, they took over. I mean, the church up to that point had just been government property, so they took that over. So this was a decisive thing for. Now we know Texas soon joined the United States, but the church didn't know that. I mean, as far as they knew, Texas was just going to be another country in perpetuity. So this was key for a key victory for Odin, and he had the assistance of the Chargé d'Affaires of France. So France had established diplomatic relations with Texas, and so helped convince the legislature to just grant to the church all the property, the church property that had previously been in the control of the government. Okay. 3 months after this report, bringing us to July 10th, 1841, Texas was elevated by the Holy See to the next echelon of ecclesiastical jurisdiction. It became an apostolic vicariate, which means that it would be served by an ordained bishop who was canonically an auxiliary bishop of the apostolic see, meaning the Diocese of Rome. And Odine was chosen to be the first apostolic vicar of Texas, receiving ordination as a bishop on March 6th, 1841. And he was the one responsible for building the Catholic Church into a viable entity in Texas after the Spanish colonial period ended. He was ordained by Bishop Antoine Blanc of New Orleans. And on May 21st, 1847, Texas was then elevated to the final stage, to the ordinary diocese in the hierarchy, and the mother, the founding diocese within the boundaries of what is now Texas, was the Diocese of Galveston, and Odine was named the first bishop of Galveston on May 21st, 1847, which at the time encompassed the entire state of Texas, although the borders of Texas, especially the north and west, were a matter of dispute that would not be settled until after a war was fought between the United States and Mexico. And we will meet him again. We will meet Odine again. In 1841 into 42, so the same time that Odine was operating in Texas, another history was made, Catholic history was made, in Indiana. Let's see. Let's boring ourselves here. All right. So, all right. Now remember, holding it like this is, it looks backwards to me. But okay, so here is Indiana, all right. And then Texas is down here, and let's see, Galveston, Texas is there. But up in Indiana, the University of Notre Dame was established. To understand that, we must introduce ourselves to Reverend Edward Frederick Sorin, S-O-R-I-N. Born February 6, 1814, near Laval, France. After completing his classical studies, Sorin entered the diocesan seminary, was ordained a priest in 1838. He found very little interest in parish work, in the work of a parish priest. But Sorin did develop a keen interest in education and missionary work. He therefore received permission from his bishop to excardinate from the diocese and join a religious community. In his case, the Congregation of the Holy Cross, the CSC. It was still is, a community of priests, brothers, and sisters, founded at Le Mans, France, by the Blessed Basil Moreau. It was founded only 1 year before Sorin was ordained a priest. Since he was both young and motivated for the missions, Sorin was assigned the task of establishing the Congregation of the Holy Cross in the United States. This was possible because the new bishop of Vincennes, Indiana, was the Most Reverend Celestine de la Halandier. That's Halandiere. Bishop Halandier wrote to the founder of the Holy Cross Fathers, Congregation of the Holy Cross, Blessed Basil Moreau, wrote to him in 1839 expressing his concern regarding the absence of Catholic education in his diocese, the Diocese of Vincennes, Indiana, which is the seat was later moved to Indianapolis. Father Sorin and 6 brothers, religious brothers, left Le Havre, France on August 8, 1841, aboard a ship called the Iowa. They debarked in New York on September 13, 1841, where they were given hospitality by Bishop Jean Dubois, whom we've already met. And he provided them logistical support. He introduced them to a person who did, because that means money, either direct money or buying things, which also takes money. A Catholic merchant in New York named Samuel Byerly, who was a very active Catholic layman, very generous with the church. So Bishop Dubois connected them, and he provided the logistical support they needed. After a few days of rest, they set out for Indiana. New York City to Albany, then to Buffalo, then a ferry through Lake Erie, then to Toledo, Ohio. They reached Bishop Hollandier in Vincennes on October 8th. He gave them the Church of St. Peter, which had a farm. It was on had farmland attached in Montgomery, Indiana. And at this point, Father Stephen Badin re-enters our story. Father Badin was still alive. He lived forever. And he remained active much longer, until his death in 1853. In the course of his ministry, he routinely acquired land when it was cheap. In some cases, he used this land and he built chapels on the land. But if settlement patterns did not justify that, he would sell the land or donate it to an ecclesiastical purpose. One such tract of land consisted of 524 acres, which he acquired in 1830, only a few miles south of the present southern border of Michigan. He constructed a chapel there among the Potawatomi, the eastern Potawatomi, and then Father Desmee was dealing with the western Potawatomi. Badin met and established cordial relations with the chief, Pokagon. And he named the chapel that he established there Sainte Marie du Lac, Our Lady of the Lake. When the Diocese of Vincennes was created, and this chapel happened to fall within the boundaries of that new diocese, Father Badin turned it over to the founding bishop, Bishop Broutet, another French immigrant priest. When Bishop Broutet died, he was followed by Bishop Hollandier, another French immigrant priest. So, and Bishop Hollandier had this. The diocese had it. And so he offered it to Father Sorin and companions on condition that they open a school on the site within 2 years. In a decision that affects U.S. Catholic history to this day, he accepted. On November 26, 1842, Father Sorin and the Holy Cross Brothers arrived at what is now South Bend, Indiana. In order to meet the bishop's timeline, Father Sorin and his brothers simply used Father Badin's old log chapel to open classes. They opened in November of 1842 with 2 students. But technically, that they fulfill the agreement with Bishop Hollandier. On January 15th, 1844, Father Sorin obtained a charter from the Indiana General Assembly, the Indiana legislature. So the states charter corporations, and a school is a corporation, or at least it can be. It doesn't have to be, but to have legal protection, it's best to do that. So he did. He obtained a charter in 1844. Under the charter, the school was officially named the University of Notre Dame du Lac, the University of Our Lady of the Lake. Originally, the enrollment was all male, reflecting the pedagogy of the time, that male and female education should be separate. A female-only school was established in the same year, so they were not They were not those who believe women should not be educated. It's just they should be educated separately. So the girls' school was St. Mary's College, established the same year, 1844, by the Sisters of the Holy Cross, near Notre Dame. The college awarded its first degrees in 1849. While Father Sorin was engaged in establishing Notre Dame University, developments in the South direct us to another turning point in Catholic history in this decade. 1842, November 21st, the establishment of a new religious community, the Sisters of the Holy Family, established by Mother Henriette de Lille. And just so I don't forget, she lived for, de Lille, Henriette is Henriette, and de Lille is Delille. She lived from March 11th, 1813, to November 16th, 1862. She died during the Civil War. As to the Sisters of the Holy Family, their self-understanding can be found in their constitution. And I'll just read a brief excerpt. Quote, "The primary end of the Congregation of the Holy Family of New Orleans is the glory of God and the sanctification of its members by the practice of the three simple vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and the observance of these constitutions. The secondary end of the congregation is to labor for the salvation of souls among the... this is the way it was phrased in the mid-19th century. So, labor for the salvation of the souls amongst the colored peoples. Okay? By the exercises of charity and zeal under the following forms: the education of children in parochial schools, academies, and industrial schools. We would call them trade schools now. The care of orphans in asylums, the care of aged and infirm in asylums. The congregation is dedicated especially to the Holy Family, which is set before the sisters as their model, both in the hidden life and in their active work." Okay, that's their self-understanding. Now, in terms of how they fit into the Catholic history in the United States, their significance, their true significance, cannot be understood by viewing their labors in isolation from the wider experience of Catholic African Americans in the South, which requires us to revisit the legacy of slavery, with which we began the course. The first few videos in this playlist are, cover in detail the legacy of slavery and the origins of slavery, both remotely in history as well as in particular in the United States. In his pioneering study of African American Catholics, a Benedictine priest historian named Cyprian Davis observed in the following words, quote, "Not only laypersons, but religious and priest avail themselves of slave labor. Catholics outside the United States, beginning with the papacy and including both clerics and lay, had developed a moral consciousness that by the middle of the 19th century could no longer tolerate slavery. But the Catholic Church in the United States found itself incapable of taking any decisive action or of enunciating clearly thought-out principles regarding slavery." End quote. Another priest, more sociologist in this case, but he also wrote about the past, so he was a historian. This was Joseph T. Gillard. He was a Josephite priest. Josephites are a religious community that their primary ministry is ministering to African American Catholics. Father Gillard wrote 2 works on the relationship of the Catholic Church to African American Catholics. He made no attempt to deny the evidence upon which Father Cyprian Davis based his later indictment of the Church in dealing with the issue of slavery. Instead, Father Gillard observed in these words, So far as the church was concerned, the church, did not create the injustice of slavery. Slavery was a social institution which the church had to face and gradually demolish. Just as it overthrew slavery in the ancient world, and for seminarians especially, or anyone watching the playlist on the patristic period, you'll see that once we converted the Roman Empire, we eliminated slavery. Anyway, back to the Father Gillard's quote. Such revolution, however, cannot be effected immediately. It is only by dealing tactfully with human nature and by persistent efforts that the church is able to make Christian ideals predominate. End quote. Okay, if you can review all the details in the beginning of the playlist, but just to refresh your memories, the transport of Africans as slaves, as property, into within the current borders of the United States began before the United States existed. It began in 1565 when the Spanish established a colony under the patronage of St. Augustine on the Atlantic coast of Florida. The economic potential of the plantation system to profit from the large-scale production and export of tobacco, cotton, and sugar, as well as rice and indigo, but it is really the tobacco, cotton, sugar were the big three, ensured that the African slave trade seeped into the four major colonial enterprises of the New World: the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, and the British. It was the existence of slavery in the British colonies on the Atlantic coast of North America that resulted in the legal protection of slavery when those colonies seceded from the British Empire and formed a republic in 1776. And that has all been covered earlier in this playlist. Looking to the future, which we'll cover in later videos, even after slavery was abolished, the collective memory that African Americans were once bought and sold as property presented a barrier to their full acceptance in both North and South. In a jarringly candid study of the African American experience in late 19th century New Orleans, in a book titled Black New Orleans, 1860 to 1880, we find the following quote: "The most unique feature of race relations in antebellum New Orleans was the pervasiveness of miscegenation. Much of the miscegenation which occurred in New Orleans later, during the Reconstruction period, was a continuation of the old antebellum pattern of concubinage." Okay. Miscegenation. Okay, it's an ugly word. It's often used as a pejorative. But in itself, it's just a descriptive term. It just describes a particular type of relationship. But many negative associations were imputed to it. In fact, it was illegal for a time. So, just the word miscegenation. It's a elision of two Latin words. The prefix is from the Latin miscere, meaning to mix, and the suffix is from the word genus, which just means a people or a race. So mixed race. So that's just a descriptive term. It doesn't have to be a negative. It's people's bigotry and prejudice and ethnic hatred and all that imputed to it negative associations, such that it was prohibited by law in many states. So the term, which just etymologically is a descriptive term, it came to have a legal meaning. It applied to illegal unions between members of different racial groups that resulted in children. In 1883, the Supreme Court of the United States, in Pace versus Alabama ruled that anti-miscegenation laws, meaning, a state outlawing racial intermarriage, that such laws did not violate the 14th Amendment, thereby upholding the legality of the Alabama State Code 4189, which prohibited marriage between whites and blacks. And this is after slavery is abolished. Slavery was abolished by constitutional amendment, 20 years earlier. But then, the state laws were enacted, and so that was challenged in Pace versus Alabama, and the Supreme Court sided with the state. The demographic significance of this system in the South was a racially mixed population outside the context of matrimony. Not because they were bad people, or not because they rejected the sacrament or anything, but because by law they were forbidden. By law they were forbidden into marriage. So this led to an alternate classification according to the hierarchical view of the day. In the antebellum period, meaning before the Civil War, a hierarchy between whites and slaves. In the postbellum period, after the Civil War, after slavery was abolished, the hierarchical distinctions continued between whites and former slaves, and then the descendants of former slaves. So the conventional label applied. Now, the reason I haven't forgotten Henriette DeLille. Henriette DeLille was a product of a mixed race union. That's why I'm going to all this, and understand that what she did, how revolutionary it was, that what she did, creating, anyway. Okay, so the conventional label applied to the racially mixed portion of the population was free people of color. Or after slavery was abolished, and you no longer needed the distinction of free because everyone was at least legally free, then it just became a man or woman of color. Man of color, woman of color, person of color. Within that class, or that strata of the population, there came to be an internal stratification based on an inverted correlation between social standing and blood and the percentages of blood. And these levels had names attached to them. That's how significant this was in the period. Now, I'm afraid to even use these names, because YouTube might. These are not nice names. And now they're considered something that should not be said. So actually, I'm not going to say it because I don't want the video taken down. But anyway, it mattered to the people then, and the percentage of, whether it okay, I'll just leave it like that. Far more complex, believe it or not, something's more complex than that. Far more complex was the development of the term Creole, Creole. Etymologically, it is derived from the Latin word creare, meaning to produce, in the sense of raising or bringing up, with the understood connotation being bringing up in one's own house or in a particular locality. The term Creole originally applied to a person born in the colonies but of pure European blood, the French, Spanish, Portuguese. The persistent social dominance of French Creoles in Louisiana, where Henriette DeLille was born, was such that it attached to their illegitimate offspring, even if the mother was a slave. So to put it another way, just as in New Orleans at the time, or Louisiana at the time, say a Norwegian slave owner who might have moved to the area, got a plantation, owned slaves. So a Norwegian slave owner in New Orleans was considered of a lower social rank than was a French slave owner. So also the child of a Norwegian slave owner with one of his slaves would be considered of a lower standing than the child of a French slave owner with his slave. The result was a whole new category. Free Creole of color was of a higher social rank than just a free person of color or a man or woman of color. So the free Creole of color, gave him an extra, higher social standing. So the free Creole of color was a term that applied to those descended from an African person or a person, born in the United States but descended from African persons, with a person of either French or Spanish descent. While the category of free man or free woman of color applied to those descended from a black person and a person of any other European background. After the Civil War ended, and the necessity of prefacing any category with the label free, the social stratification within the black community in southern Louisiana continued, such that those blacks with French or Spanish blood continued to refer to themselves as Creoles of color. With the passage of time, the distinction of color was dropped in ordinary usage, leaving only the term Creole, standing alone with the unspoken but understood connotation of Creole of color. So it was by this convoluted process that the term Creole shifted from its original meaning of a person of pure French or Spanish blood to meaning the exact opposite, a person of mixed French or Spanish blood with African blood. Franco-African Creoles in New Orleans, at southern Louisiana, were for the most part Catholic. The relationship of a Franco-African Creole to his or her Franco-Creole family of origin was part of a functioning tapestry of the social milieu in New Orleans as a former French colony, because they would often share surnames. So it was not unusual, not at all unusual, for a prosperous white businessman in New Orleans to keep a Franco-African Creole mistress in a relationship described with the term plaçage, P-L-A-C-A-G-E. Etymologically, the word plaçage is a French word that means a veneer, like a covering. The Gallic social mores of the time would not have given a second thought to the obvious adultery, because marriages were arranged. So, and the marriages were arranged for business reasons by the families, and often the boy and girl who had to marry didn't even meet each other before the marriage. So, so other men would not have blinked at if this guy had illegitimate children. But if the man neglected his children by his mistress, then he would lose face among his male peers, as it would suggest that he could not afford to do so, and that he was a loser, basically. For this reason, men in such positions would see that their Franco-African Creole children were educated. Male children of such unions were most often trained in a trade, to be skilled craftsmen, and might form a part of the extended commercial network of the white businessman. So they might actually work for their father. Options available for female children of such unions were less varied, as were the options of females in general, even those who were born free, of European immigrants. The population of such unions, mixed race unions in New Orleans, was large enough to prompt the Ursuline sisters to form the Ladies' Congregation of the Children of Mary. This congregation allowed free women of color to be members, and it took as its mission the baptism and religious education of the girls born of such Franco-African Creole unions. The typical means of accomplishing this very delicate task, because I know this seems abstruse, but this really mattered, in the 19th century mores. So that this is a very delicate thing to matter. So the typical way they did this was a member of the congregation a female would serve as godmother for the children that were being raised. And the congregation welcomed women of all levels of the racial strata. So a godmother would be paired with a child of the same racial mixture. That's how seriously they took this. The social service provided by this congregation was considered so important that when the Ursulines relocated their convent downriver, so the original convent was in the French Quarter, and the building's still there. It's just down the street from the cathedral. The second convent was downriver. It is where the industrial canal is now. But the convent was actually there, and later the property was stolen by the government, eminent domain, to make the industrial canal. So then the Ursulines moved to their third convent on State Street, where Ursuline School is now. Anyway, the social service provided by them was so important that when the Ursulines moved downriver, a school for free Creole girls of color was opened in 1823 to perform the same function in the city. Because these girls, they couldn't go that far downriver, because that was out of town. But now it's within New Orleans, but at the time it was out of town. And this school provided the girls with basic religious instruction, obviously Catholic, basic literacy, reading and writing, French, not English at this period, and skills, sewing, cooking, handwriting, music, and arithmetic. And so it happened. Now you see why I spent so much time on this. And so it happened that a wealthy New Orleans French businessman named Claude Joseph Dubril took one of his female African slaves named Marie as his concubine. Together they had 3 children, all of whom were given religious instruction and literacy by the congregation. Claude's great-great-granddaughter by his slave Marie was Henriette de Lille. Henriette was herself the daughter of a Frenchman named Jean-Baptiste de Lille Sarpy, with his Franco-Hispanic African Creole concubine named Marie Josephine Diaz. Both of them, Henriette as well as her mother, attended that same school. It was assumed that Henriette de Lille would follow the path of her female ancestors and seek material security through a plissage with a wealthy white man. For this reason, she was groomed to attend. Actually, I don't even know if I can use the term now that I'm thinking about it. On YouTube, I don't know if the video. Anyway, there were balls, social gatherings balls, that had a specific name referring to one of those levels of racial distinction. So the way things are now, I'm not even going to say the term. But anyway, it was you get the picture. And these were social events that were held regularly in the city to facilitate the system of concubinage described above. Records from the 1820s suggest that Henriette gave birth to 2 sons who died, both named Henri. One death record from St. Louis Cathedral, Sacramento Register, listed Henri as the son of Henriette de Lille. Other records have been found that are difficult to reconstruct because of the naming problem. So there's another record who refers to Henry as the son of Marie. So there's one record in the cathedral that describes a Henry, the son of Henriette, then another, the son of Marie. But, the French at this time, they had multiple names. So, anyway. Yet another record named the mother of this second Henri, as Henriette Sarpy. And that was one of her father's names. So there is a possibility also that Henriette, as a teenager, brought in an abandoned child to be baptized, and that the priest who did the baptism and wrote down the records mistook it or just assumed that she was the mother. So that's one positive. So either these could have been her actual children from this process, or it could have been a child that she was taking care of, who was abandoned, that she got baptized before the children. But the death records exist. So, in any case, that's why I say it's a possibility. Well, it's just the records exist. The records are not but I mean the interpretation of them. So it was Henri, the son of Henriette, or and then was real son or adopted son, or In any case, in 1827, Henriette found a spiritual mother in Sister Martha Fontier, who in 1823 established a school in New Orleans for girls like Henriette of mixed racial ancestry. Henriette began teaching there in the same year, while receiving religious instruction for her own formation, culminating in her confirmation in the year 1834. De Lille, Henriette came to feel that while the school did have great value, something more was needed. Henriette formed a new confraternity called the Congregation of the Sisters of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, 2 years later in 1836. They were dedicated to personal piety and to service. Henriette felt it essential that those who joined present an irreproachable example as an antidote, to the prevailing attitudes in a city which witnessed these kind of balls and the plissage relationship was normalized. The Archbishop of New Orleans at the time, a guy actually was bishop then, the Most Reverend Antoine Blanc, we've already met him. He was a French missionary priest, became Bishop of New Orleans in 1835, and then elevated to Archbishop in 1850. He met Henriette, was impressed with her and her companions, and he immediately perceived the benefit of such a group to the faith in New Orleans, reasoning that they would have additional prestige if they had Vatican recognition. Bishop Blanc applied to Rome for permission to affiliate Henriette's group with the sodality of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Rome. Significant in the day, because that meant they could participate and promote indulgenced devotions. Bishop Blanc, an idealist but a realistic idealist, tactfully omitted from his request the fact that the ladies were of mixed racial ancestry. So at the time when her cause was first being postulated, this, did the bishop lie? No, he did not lie. He did not comment at all on her, and that was not one of the questions that he had to answer. So he did not lie. He just realistically omitted a description of their racial ancestry. So the request was granted without reservation or delay in 1841. The following year, November 21st, 1842, this little group became the Sisters of the Holy Family. In the same year, another French missionary priest, Father Etienne Roussillon, who was a graduate of the same seminary as Bishop Blanc back in France, the Sulpician Seminary of St. Irenaeus in Lyon, he established St. Augustine Parish in New Orleans, specifically to serve Creole Catholics of color. There, he came to know Henriette Deleu and her sisters, and he also resolved to help them, to provide them with the advantages and protections of legal status. He guided them into incorporating in 1847 so they could raise money and acquire property as a corporation. By the time Henriette died on November 16, 1862, during the Civil War, the Holy Family sisters, they had 12 sisters, and they owned a home for the elderly in the city. In 1881, 19 years after Henriette's death, the Sisters of the Holy Family purchased the ballroom on Orleans Avenue in the French Quarter, where those balls were held, the name of which I'm afraid to say on YouTube, where these meetings were held and where the plaçage were arranged. And in that place, the Sisters of the Holy Family installed their convent and St. Mary's Academy, providing girls a chance for a better life, than what that building had previously offered them. So that was a moral triumph. In 1988, the cause for canonization for Henriette Deleu was initiated under the direction of Archbishop Philip Hannon of New Orleans. An honorary doctorate was awarded by Notre Dame Seminary in New Orleans, where the Holy Family Sisters worked until 1982. And the honorary doctorate was awarded to Mother Mary de Chantal Saint Julien on May 7th, 1994. She accepted in the name of all the Holy Family Sisters. Through the efforts of the late Archbishop Hannon, the cause continued, and Pope, now Saint John Paul II, declared her a servant of God. So Henriette is a servant of God. So she's in the process, in the pipeline, so to speak, for canonization. So now we just wait. She'll need one miracle before beatification, and then another miracle after beatification in order to be canonized. Pope Benedict XVI declared her venerable on March 27th, 2010. So rewinding back to, it was, when it was founded in 1842, in a twisted temporal convergence, on November 22nd, 1842, one day after the Sisters of the Holy Family were established, the American Protestant Association had its first organizational meeting. Hold on a second, I got to check. Ooh, okay. All right, we're over an hour, so I'm going to stop this, and we'll pick up next time. We'll just continue as many videos as needed to finish the 1840s. So we'll stop here, and we'll pick up with that next time. For the moment, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.